Good evening and welcome to the 27th anniversary edition of the Summit State of the River. My name is Jim Pokran. I'm on the staff at the Colorado River District, and this annual public free water education event is co-hosted by the Colorado River District and by your Blue River Watershed Group. I have to say that even though this is our 27th year, this is our first virtual one, and amazingly, we've had 269 people register to attend. So that's a fantastic audience, and thank you so much. In fact, it exceeds the best numbers that we've ever done when we had a live event at the Silverthorne Pavilion. So without further ado, going to proceed with a little introduction of what our agenda is about, and then we'll jump right into our speakers. So our first speaker is going to be Andy Mueller. Andy is General Manager of the Colorado River District, and he has been since 2018. I don't know if Andy knew the acute water policy decisions that would be upon us when he took the office, or whether he understood how interesting our financial picture would be thanks to Colorado's convoluted constitution, among other things. But he'll talk more about that later. Then we're going to jump into what we're always interested in, and that's what's our snowpack and what's our water supply outlook. And Troy Wineland, our Summit County Water Commissioner, is going to give us that presentation. In fact, I should mention, give a shout out to Troy's predecessor, Scott Hummer. Scott is the person who started this series 27 years ago. And then we're going to move on to the Bureau of Reclamation and the person of Victor Lee, a hydrology engineer. And Victor's going to talk to us about Green Mountain Reservoir operations, and in fact, the whole Colorado Big Thompson collection system, which has a great influence on the upper Colorado River. Then we're going to hear from Denver Water and Nathan Elder, who's the raw water manager. Then we're always interested to see how Denver's total water supply looks and how they're going to be looking at their transmountain diversions. Dillon is their biggest West Slope project. And those who like to sail or operate boats, if they're from the marinas, this is always an interesting topic. And then we're going to segue into the Colorado Springs project at Blue Lakes in Calhoun Abasi, who's the Colorado Springs Utilities Water Planning Supervisor. She's also an engineer, and she'll talk to us about that project up on Hoosier Pass. And then we're going to conclude the major presentations with the Blue River Watershed Group telling us about an ongoing study that's happening right now, the Blue River Integrated Water Management Plan, that's looking at the Blue River and issues of trout and such. And we're going to have the presentations made by Peggy Bailey. She's the board vice president, and Erica Donahue, who's the executive director, the new executive director of the Blue River Watershed Group. And welcome to that, Erica. That's not that far past that you took that position. So Andy, we're going to throw it to you, and you have 20 minutes to tell us about everything that's very important.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everybody, I would say, coming out tonight, but finding your computer and turning us on. We really do appreciate everybody, your interest in water, and we just want to welcome you here. If I can talk a little bit about the River District and what we do, we're a government agency covering 15 counties, and Alicia, if you want to, there we go. And our mission is to lead in the protection, conservation, use, and development of the water resources of the Colorado River Basin. With our 15 county area that you see on the screen there, we go all the way from Moffett up in the northwest to Ouray down in the southeast. And it's about 28% of the state. We have about 500,000 residents in the state. We, within our district, approximately 80% of the snowfall in the state falls in our district, and on the other part of the West Slope, which is covered by the Southwestern Water Conservation District. And, but we have less than 20% of the population. So as you're all very well aware, here in Summit County, that's led the growing Front Range for over 100 years to figure out ways to bring water eastward to help with the economic development on the Front Range, the municipal, agricultural, and industrial development over there. Finding that balance that allows our state as a whole to thrive, but also protecting our water resources and keeping water flowing westward is what we primarily focus on at the River District. I should say that together with our work in the Colorado River Basin as a whole, in our role protecting the state's entitlement under the Colorado River. You hear a lot today, these days, I should say, about the stresses that the Colorado River faces and the growing population, as well as I'll get into climate change here in a little bit. Our district, as I mentioned, was formed back in 1937, and I think this is a good time to change slides, Alicia. It happened as a result of the fact that people on the West Slope, community leaders, found out that the Colorado Big Thompson project and some other developments on the Front Range, intending to take the water and bring it eastward, they actually read about it in the paper. They didn't have a watchdog. They didn't have an organization that was actively engaged in discussions with the Bureau of Reclamation. They didn't have an organization that was here to advocate on their behalf. And so out of that conflict, primarily over the Colorado Big Thompson district development, our district was formed. And if we can move to the next slide. So it's important, if you'll note on this slide, the River District sits in the northwest corner of the state of Colorado. In the basin as a whole, it's not a tremendous landmass considering the full basin. But within our district boundaries, approximately 60% of the water, annual water production in the entire basin is formed. Together with the Southwest District, it's closer to 75% of the water in the Colorado River. And if you take the upper basin as a whole, it's closer to 90%. So Wyoming, Utah, and parts of New Mexico, along with Colorado, produce that water. As you can tell, the dark gray areas are urban and agricultural areas outside of the natural Colorado River Basin that depend upon that water. All told, there are about 40 million people who depend upon the water that originates within our district, and millions of acres of agricultural land. It's really the lifeblood of southwestern Colorado, or excuse me, of southwestern United States and Mexico. We're facing a number of strains on the river right now. Primarily, I want to just chat a little bit, if we can move to the next slide. The biggest threat on the river has and continues to be, Alicia, can we move this slide next? Yep, the overuse in the lower basin. This is a Pima County cotton field down in Arizona. And I don't mean to pick solely on the cotton growers down there, but their cities and agricultural water users in Arizona, California, and Nevada have historically used approximately 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet of water more than they were entitled to under the Colorado River Compact. Alicia, if you could advance the slide. And so that, if you picture that in times of plenty, as we had in the 80s and the early 90s, even the late 90s, was sufficient to even with that overuse, we managed to keep the reservoirs reasonably full. We managed to allow for all sorts of uses and actually have enough water where the Colorado River flowed naturally out to the Sea of Cortez. Today, with overuse in the lower basin, and if we can move to the next slide, the other major issue facing the West, the United States, and frankly the entire globe is, as we know, climate change. And I want to point out, this is a really interesting graphic. It's put together by the Washington Post, but it's based upon data generated by NOAA. And what they found is that between 1895 and 2018, there were uneven areas of heating, if you will, in the United States as well as globally. But this is based on county by county data produced by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. And you can note that the biggest, darkest, hottest area in the entire United States is right on the upper basin and frankly, right in our district. If we can move to the next slide. That change over time in our counties, remember 1895 to 2018, has really hit some of our counties extremely hard. Rio Blanco at 4.3 degrees temperature rise over that period of time. Mesa at 4.2, Montrose 4.3. Interestingly enough, Summit, where many of you are tonight, only just under 2 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperatures. But still, keep in mind, 2 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperatures is a significant difference in average temperature, and it's enough to cause serious impacts on stream flow, snow as it falls, or precipitation falling as rain or snow. It's enough to really impact our streams. This slide will show you really interesting data that's been developed over the last several years by the Western Water Assessment and some scientists out of the USGS that was recently published in Science magazine this year. So for every 1 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature, the stream flow in the Colorado and its tributaries decreases between 3 and 5.2%. That 3 and 5.2% is just the difference in some of those studies. Most recent study really indicates a higher end decrease in flow, that 5.2%. If you look at that and you think about the fact that we're predicted globally to rise 2 to 5 degrees over the next 30 years, you're looking at anywhere between a 6 and a almost 26% decrease in the natural flow of the Colorado River. Keep in mind, even without that increase, we have seen over the last 20 years an incredible imbalance in that river where it's stopped flowing to the sea, where many of our users are curtailed on a regular basis, both in the upper basin and in the lower basin. They're looking at shortages. Clearly, we've got a lot to do, a lot of work. It's a resource that is shrinking while the population is growing. If I can turn to the next slide, just to real quickly talk about what's happening there. So you get more fall and spring precipitation falling as rain instead of snow. It's not as efficient when it falls as snow, so it soaks into the soil and doesn't make it to the river. More snowpack evaporates straight up into gas, so the snow goes from a solid to a liquid or to a gas without becoming liquid water. You have earlier snowmelt and a longer growing season. And that growing season can be the natural riparian vegetation, our alpine vegetation, and our crops. Some of that is great economically for the producers or for those of us like myself who might be a backyard gardener. But it is disastrous for the river because less water makes it in. The challenges are pretty tremendous, but Alicia, if we could go forward. There we go. So what is the River District doing, these days to deal with these issues? I can tell you, we worked very hard at one basic idea, and that gets us involved in all sorts of activities, and that is keeping the water on the west slope, keeping water available for all of the human and environmental needs on the western slope of the state of Colorado. And so that puts us in projects within agricultural communities, helping improve efficiencies and conservation measures, lining ditches. It puts us in all sorts of political discussions with Front Range water providers, the state of Colorado, the Upper Colorado River Commission. Our staff is extremely busy, and I will tell you that what's really interesting with our stay-at-home order over the last 2 months is our staff has found ourselves even busier than we were before, mainly because we don't have the excuse that we're driving in between all the meetings that we go to. So we seem to actually have more workload and more expectations. I want to talk a little bit more about what we do. So we're keeping water flowing to farms and ranches, ensuring adequate drinking water supplies. And a lot of that has to do with making sure there's enough volume in the rivers for the towns and cities that have direct diversions out of the rivers, helping those urban and rural water providers figure out ways to store and efficiently use their water. We're securing legal protections for water on the West Slope. And again, that's through a series of negotiations. And I can point to one close to home here in Summit County. The Colorado Springs Utilities has filed on a diligence application on something called the Montgomery Reservoir. The River District is in that case working with Colorado Springs as an opposer, trying with a coalition of Summit County governments and water users, trying to make sure that the springs, while they have a right to develop their water, doesn't cause undue damage to the Blue River and the folks that depend upon it. We're negotiating terms and conditions and working on those issues literally as we speak. A lot of that ties right into maintaining healthy rivers in our district. Those clean, clear water here in Summit County provides clean, clear water for agricultural diversions, not only in this county, but all the way downstream into Mesa County. Really critical things that all fit together. But we have at the district a small staff of about 21 folks who ranging from water engineers and hydrologic specialists, a few lawyers, a few government affairs specialists, public affairs folks, and our fantastic administrative staff. It's a small staff when you compare us to the folks that we're dealing with, the entities that we're dealing with, the size of Denver Water, Northern, or other places. So we really do our best to represent the West Slope and keep our voice unified through our board and through our work. We're able, luckily, to stay out of partisan politics and focus on science and facts, and that for us is really critical. If we can go to the next slide, Alicia. So the question is, what does our future look like? We know that we're going to have hotter temperatures. I think that the science is really clear on that. We know that our population, despite the current pandemic, continues to grow, and that's both within this state and in the southwestern United States. We've got a big job providing a growing population with a dwindling resource, and so we look out into the future and we say we've really got to secure that. And since I've been at the district, we've been doing an analysis of our district finances to make sure that we're properly equipped to really handle what's coming our way. When the district was formed, the people on the Western Slope that asked the General Assembly to form it asked the General Assembly to give us 2.5 mills of taxing authority. That taxing authority today, mainly due to Tabor, is down at under 1/4 of a mill, or just around 1/4 of a mill. So 1/10 of the original taxing authority that we had. What we find ourselves in a situation where we've had to reduce our workforce. I think we're still doing our job well, but we've become much more efficient in what we do. The other thing that we found that we're unable to do as much of what we'd like to do is meet and help prioritize and lead in the development and creation of important water projects on the West Slope. And if we can turn the page here. Before I get into exactly what we were talking about, just to mention what's hitting us hard, and that is the declining tax revenue from the energy industry. We have traditionally enjoyed about 1/4 of our revenue coming from oil, gas, coal, and energy-related tax revenues. That has last year declined to about 11%. We have projected a decline close to 0, given the desire of many of us to live in a fossil-free world, and we don't at the River District, it's not our job to take a position on that. We're just pointing out that and recognizing the state's policy, our energy providers' policies that are driving the closure of some of our power plants and coal mines, the decline, which was occurring before the pandemic, but has been accelerated, of our gas industry on the West Slope. So we see that happening. We also, as I mentioned, have been getting ratcheted down by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And then on top of that, there's this Gallagher Amendment, which is a really archaic piece of amendment to our Constitution, which frankly balances the tax revenue that causes our commercial property owners to pay a greatly outsized share of tax within our district. And so that the way that Gallagher Amendment affects us is that it just means that we are looking at significant declines. In fact, earlier this week, the State Department of Local Affairs came out with a prediction for 2021 in which they predicted a decline in that what's called a residential assessment ratio set under Gallagher, which will, if they're correct, would cause a $450,000 decrease in the district's revenues. And that's roughly about a 20% decrease to our revenues on a year-over-year basis. So it's really significant. If we could turn to the next slide, Alicia. So what are we doing about that? I will tell you that before this pandemic, at least I should say before we recognized how devastating it was going to be in January, I made the recommendation to our board to consider putting a mill levy increase question on the ballot in November. It would raise our mill levy to 1/2 of a mill, which would result in approximately $4.9 million of additional revenue to the district. What that means to your median homeowner in the district is about a $6.34 a year increase. So from an individual homeowner's perspective, not a huge tax increase, but from our perspective, it provides a $4.9 million nest egg. And if we can move to the next slide, I can hopefully explain what we would do with that. We have recognized, and I think the state water plan recognizes very clearly, significant issues, unmet needs in terms of water infrastructure all throughout the state. But we know it exists within our district, mainly because of the work of the Basin Roundtables and their basin implementation plans, as well as our own work working with our water users. What I propose to our board is that we would take that revenue, about 85% of that revenue, and invest it in partnerships with our local communities and water providers. And we would try to perform an equitable split over time in between these buckets of water, if you will: the productive agriculture, conservation and efficiency, healthy rivers, watershed health and quality, and infrastructure. All of these things are what we need, we believe, to have a successful future for all of our residents, whether they're here in Summit County or they're in the border counties growing crops or drinking water. It's the same water, and we do better when we work together to figure out how to do it. Our plan would be to use that money on an annual basis to find the projects that are really the highest priority to Western Colorado, and leverage that as a stimulus to really get federal, state, and private foundation money to come into the district and achieve the priorities of Western Colorado. And that's our goal. Our board is thinking about it. In April, they shelved it to our July meeting because of the impacts that are going on with the pandemic. We honestly don't know if we're going to bring this question to the voters or not. We believe that there are reasons not to. Obviously, the economic devastation to our private business owners and local governments is really apparent. Our hourly workers so many of them are out of work, and the idea of another tax is hard to take for anybody. On the other hand, bringing the seed money to the table and bringing in important public infrastructure during this time can actually bring jobs and protect our water resources. And Alicia, if we could go to the next slide. I think it's really exciting from our perspective, and to think about, we and our board members, Karen Stegelmeyer as your board member in Summit County, we're very interested in your input, your questions about what we're talking about. You know, whether you are in favor of it or not, we would really like to hear from you, because we're trying to understand what the public wants and how we can best serve our mission. With that, I'll turn it back to Jim, and I think at the end, I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And indeed, we will take questions at the end. I should have mentioned that at the top. And you can pose your questions in the Q&A section in the Zoom interface at the bottom of the screen. So now we're going to dig into the hydrology. Andy talked about some of the bigger picture stuff, but that's always informed by year in and year out climate and hydrology, as he showed us. So Troy Wineland is probably appearing from the most beautiful spot on this webinar, Sapphire Point, overlooking Dillon Reservoir. He didn't have to interrupt the wedding to get that setting. But Troy, take it away and tell us how the snowpack and the water supply looks like, and how the Division of Water Resources may be viewing this coming water year.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Good evening, everyone. Just a quick audio check. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, great. So good evening, everyone. This is your Blue River watershed. I got a beautiful evening out here. Got the 10-mile range, Dillon Reservoir, of course, one of two linchpins here in Summit County for West Slope water. Absolutely gorgeous evening, and very fortunate to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I am your District 36 Blue River Water Commissioner. Okay, Alicia, you can go ahead and advance the slide. It's a brief outline, just going to talk about where we're at, short-term and near-term forecast, and then look at the peak runoff, and then just a couple updates on DWR priorities this year. Okay, Alicia, thank you. So this graphic basically shows us for water year 2020. Actually, I'm sorry, water year 2019. So this is to date. So the water year in hydrologic sense begins in October and runs through the following October. And so this is the precipitation for the time period October to present day. And as you can see, the entire Colorado River Basin there, relatively speaking, of course, higher elevation, we fared pretty well, a little above average, whereas our counterparts in Wyoming, Southwest Colorado, and Utah did not fare quite as well. As a percentage of average, about 110% for the upper part of the Colorado River Basin. Okay, Alicia. So this next graphic, I just threw this in here for comparison. This was last year's snowpack at this time. I think we peaked at about 130%. Just threw that in for comparative purposes. Okay, Alicia. And so this is the snowtail graphic. For those, you're going to see some different numbers from Nathan probably. So I'll just share with you. This is an average of all the snowtail sites within Summit County. So this includes the lower elevation snowtail sites below Dillon Reservoir. So as you can see there, at the end of April, we peaked at about 118% of average. And currently, as of today, we're sitting at about 117% of average. Okay, Alicia. This is the short-term precipitation outlook. So this is for the next 8 to 14 days. You can see that we have about a 40% probability of increased precipitation during that time period. Okay, Alicia. And then for that same time period, the next 8 to 14 days, this is the temperature forecast. And you can see there, west slope falls in the gray area, which is about normal or average temperatures for that time period. Okay, Alicia. And then this is looking at the 30-day. Again, precipitation here, we're looking at about 40% probability for increased precipitation above average. Next slide, Alicia. And then equal chances for temperatures. So we're going to be about average for the temperatures here for the next 30 days. And I threw this graphic in, this mosaic. So basically just interpreting this, the upper part of the Colorado River Basin there in the circle. What I just want to show you here is that the soils going into this previous snowfall season were incredibly dry. So Andy had mentioned, you know, a few things about the changes in precipitation patterns, and the timing of runoff. You know, we're getting more precipitation in the form of rain, and we're getting earlier snowmelt. Another thing that definitely impacts the amount of snow that actually melts and makes it to our creeks and lakes and rivers is how dry that soil is. The drier that soil is, the more it's going to absorb that snow when it begins to melt. So we won't necessarily see all of the snow on these peaks make it into our rivers and reservoirs in the short term. Okay, Alicia. So how does all that, how can we interpret all of that? Well, this is the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. They put together these forecasts to help communities and the river district and myself and irrigators plan for the season. And what this graphic is showing you is the forecasted peak for 10 Mile Creek in Frisco. And right now that forecasted peak is 700 CFS. And whereas last year, this time, I believe it was about 830. Can't read that number there, but I believe that's about what it was. And so just a reminder, typically the peak, we usually see that peak first or second week of June here in Summit County. Okay, Alicia. And then this is just the same graphic. Oh, we're missing the line there. So this is the same forecast for the Snake River, forecasted peak of 350. So just to share with you, this is consistent across the basin, the Blue River Basin. You know, we're looking at peaks that are anywhere from, gosh, I think most of them are about a third to a fifth of bankful. So the relative threat for any flooding issues, you know, overtopping the banks in any of the creeks or rivers this season, very low. You know, it's not to say that it's not possible, because of course we could always get a rain on snow event or a lot of heat over consecutive, you know, several days that could melt that snow very rapidly and could very easily cause flooding problems. But relatively speaking, we're sitting good. No big concern there. Okay, Alicia. So this is off of the CDSS website, the Colorado Decision Support Systems website, which I'll show you a little how to access that here shortly. But this is the current call on the Blue River Basin. So Green Mountain is currently calling out the Blue River Basin above Green Mountain Reservoir. And so that admin number there, the 50038, if your water right admin number is lower than that, then you are in priority and can divert. If you have a higher number water right, then of course you need an aug plan or some other form of augmentation or exchange to divert out of priority. Okay, Alicia. And so as I had mentioned, the state has, DWR has invested a lot of time and effort in updating the Colorado Decision Support System. I've highlighted several of what I think are probably the most relevant resources on this website. But the one I want to point out specifically is the one in yellow down there at the bottom. And basically what this tool allows you to do is to set up some alerts for yourself. So you can, say, for example, irrigators who pull water out of the lower blue below Dillon, you could set some alerts on your through this system to either email you or text you when the outflows from Dillon Reservoir come up, which of course could assist you in adjusting your head gates appropriately, whether the flows are going up or down. But there are a number of forecasts, a number of stream gauges, calls on the river that you can set this up for. Okay, Alicia. And so this is really the priority right now is, so we're in the 2020 decennial abandonment process. So last year, all the water commissioners went out and field investigated all of the potential candidates for abandonment. And so just in a nutshell, every 10 years, the state is obligated to do this per Colorado revised statutes. And basically what we do is we go through and look for all of those water rights out there that have shown no use for a period of 10 years or greater. Okay, Alicia, you can go to the next slide. And if you're interested in this process, these are the important dates. So July 1st, 2020, I haven't heard of any potential delays based upon COVID. I know for Division 5, we shouldn't have any problem meeting this deadline. July 1st, 2020, we will publish that abandonment list. And then if you are on that abandonment list, you have until July 1st, 2021 to respond and file a statement of objection, to protect your water right. And so that in a nutshell is what's going on. I just want to thank you all for participating tonight in the 27th annual State of the River. I also want to just put a shout out to all the emergency services, nurses, doctors, everyone out there, all the workers who are out there on the front lines. Thank you so much. Hope all of you and your families are healthy and well, and that you remain that way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Troy. And because you were so quick, we have time for one question. And one of our listeners wants to know if there's any concern about the town of Breckenridge postponing their work on Goose Pasture Tarn.
So yeah, so they have postponed the work, and that is due to the COVID and contractors and be able to get them in and allow them to do the work safely. As far as concerns, no. So the dam safety engineer, not only the dam safety engineer for Division 5, but also the state dam safety engineer, they've all reviewed the plans and looked at the status of that reservoir. It's currently under a storage restriction. That's something that I monitor, but town of Breckenridge is definitely, they have the safety of the residents of Breckenridge and the county. That's their first concern. So they keep that reservoir at or below that reservoir restriction, that storage level, and which keeps everything at a, I guess keeps everything safe and in good order for all of us. And I thank you for asking that question. But no concern there as far as the delay of the construction on that project.
We still have a minute or two, and there's another question for you.
Okay.
And this person wants to know what happens to abandoned water rights and how much water is that? I know you can't answer the second part of the question, but what does happen to abandoned water rights?
So one thing I will share with you is it's a very difficult process to prove abandonment. Not only, so there are water rights that are on that list here in District 36 in the Blue River Basin. There are some that are up for partial abandonment, some that are up for complete or entire abandonment. But it's not only a period of non-use, but the difficult hurdle to clear is non-use with intention. So most of you know, if your name does come up on the list, if your water right does come up, I wouldn't be too concerned. You know, you're certainly welcome to contact me. I'd certainly be able to help you out and point you in the right direction as far as next steps. But yeah, I'll just put it at that. You know, you can prove non-intention to abandon relatively easily, I would say.
Hey, Troy, one more on that topic. Where would
Yes.
the list be published?
So they typically publish. They'll definitely publish it on the state website, and then they also publish in the newspapers of record. So here in Summit County, that would be Summit Daily, and then in Glenwood Springs, the what is it? The Glenwood Independent? Is that the
Post Independent. Yeah.
Post Independent? Yes. Yep. And then you'll also receive an official, if your contact information is up to date, you'll also receive an official letter in the mail notifying you.
Great. Thank you so much. And that concludes our presentation from Troy.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
I should mention that the tool that Troy referenced at the end of his PowerPoint, you can get the link to that if you go to the Zoom webinar chat tool. So next, we're going to have Victor Lee from the Bureau of Reclamation talk to us and give us the lowdown on Green Mountain Reservoir and the whole Colorado Big Thompson collection system. So take it away, Victor.
Great, thanks, Jim. I'd like to thank the River District and the Blue River Watershed group for going ahead and extending this invitation to the Bureau of Reclamation. I just want to do a quick sound check. Can I be heard?
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyways, again, as Jim said, I'm Victor Lee. I'm a civil engineer. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm one of the engineers that work on the Colorado Big Thompson River, our Big Thompson project, as well as other projects that have been assigned to our office. Next slide, please. Just real quick, like outline, I'm going to talk a little bit of just an introduction to Bureau of Reclamation, Eastern Colorado Area Office, who we are and what we do. I'm going to focus in on looking at the Colorado Big Thompson project. I'll drill down a little bit further into looking at Green Mountain Reservoir, what our planned operations are for this 2020 runoff year, and finally, I'll also jump over to the Colorado River Collection System, another feature of the Colorado Big Thompson project. Next slide. Okay, first of all, the Bureau of Reclamation is a federal agency, and we are the largest wholesale supplier of water in the Western United States. Projects include the Lake Mead and the Boulder Storage Project, as well as the Glen Canyon Dam, Grand Coulee, and in Colorado includes both the Aspinall units, which are operated by another office, as well as the Colorado Big Thompson. Reclamation serves as the trustee in the operation and management for these projects for you as citizens of the United States. We do not own them, so to speak. You do as citizens, and we operate these with the intent to put these valuable resources to the best benefit for the entire country and citizenship. Reclamation is subdivided into various area offices, of which I'm associated with the Eastern Colorado Area Office. We are located in Loveland at one of the original facilities of the Colorado Big Thompson, which is called the Flatiron Power Plant, where we generate the largest amount of power generated by the Colorado Big Thompson. And again, we act as the trustee for two trans-basin diversion projects, both the Colorado Big Thompson, which I'm talking about today, as well as the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, which includes Rudai Reservoir and Pueblo Reservoir on the east slope. Next slide. Like I said, I'm mostly going to focus in here on the Colorado Big Thompson project. As Andy Mueller mentioned earlier, the Colorado Big Thompson project was conceived back in the turn of the 19th or the end of the 19th century and was authorized under the Roosevelt administration in the 30s, at the same time that the Colorado state went ahead and authorized the development of conservation and conservancy districts. The Colorado Big Thompson project is the largest single trans-basin diversion project in Colorado. We deliver approximately 230,000, or about the approximate volume of Dillon Reservoir water, to the South Platte Basin for agriculture, municipal, and industrial use by the citizens of Colorado and northern Colorado. We, our project beneficiaries, because of the way this project is authorized, includes beneficiaries all the way from the Nebraska border to the Utah border. There are basically 4 different units or within the Colorado Big Thompson project, and that includes the Green Mountain Reservoir located in Summit and Grand County, Colorado River Collection System, which is on the Upper Colorado, East Slope Power and Distribution System, where most of our power generating facilities are located, and finally a South Basin Delivery System, which was built for Northern Water Conservancy District. And that all of those features have been transferred over to Northern after repayment was complete, and I will not be talking further about those. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Colorado Big Thompson, this is an overview of the facilities that Reclamation manages. In the lower left-hand corner circled is Green Mountain Reservoir. That was a replacement and storage reservoir that was built, and the first feature to be built as under the authorization, which allowed the development of the remaining portions of the project. In particular, it was started before World War II. Briefly, it was ceased, but then it was recommenced because the power generation from Green Mountain was considered a valuable wartime asset that needed to be developed and put into place. Next slide. Oh, there's a missing slide here, but okay, back one more slide. Okay, the next feature is what I call the Colorado River Collection System. This composed of 3 reservoirs and Grand Lake and a trans-basin diversion tunnel. This is the portion of the Colorado Big Thompson project that collects and stores most of the water that is used for diversion to the east slope for beneficial use. Lake Granby is the largest reservoir feature with about 550,000 acre feet of storage within the reservoir. Next slide. And finally, the last portion of it is the last portion of the slide is the what we call the power and distribution system. This captures the 3,000 feet of head loss that of the water as it falls from the east side of Rocky Mountain National Park and drops and is finally delivered to our terminal reservoirs at Horsetooth and Carter reservoirs. There are 4 power plants. These power plants have the capacity to generate approximately electrical power for 60,000 homes, as well as delivering the 230,000 acre feet of water annually for agricultural, municipal, and industrial use. This project, both the collection system and portions of the distribution arm, are operated and managed in collaboration with Northern Water, who serves as a contractor to the federal government for the maintenance and operation of some of those facilities. Next slide, please. Looking more specifically, we're going to look at Green Mountain Reservoir. And I like to equate Green Mountain Reservoir similar to that early book, The Little Engine That Could. It was an incredibly optimistic endeavor for a very young state back in the 30s, where this project was going to be built and make sure that it would not harm the economic development of the beneficiaries to the project that lived within the upper Colorado River Basin. So, but it works very hard, and as a result, it is really designed so that every year it is going to fill to the top, and then it's going to deliver all of that stored runoff over the year until runoff begins again the next year. So some of the functions that it does, it includes making replacement water for water that would otherwise be curtailed because of senior water rights. That includes West Slope beneficiaries, as well as the Colorado River collection system for our East Slope beneficiaries. In addition, Green Mountain also provides water to help with irrigation, agriculture, and municipal and industrial use within the western slope within the upper Colorado Basin, from the Continental Divide all the way to the confluence with the Gunnison River. More recently, Green Mountain has taken a major role in some of providing augmentation water for the long-term recovery of the Colorado endangered fishes within the lower Colorado River. We'll talk more about this, but it provides many functions that help in that recovery. Finally, the reservoir also has a power plant that generates electrical power that supplies about the equivalent of 6,000 homes of electrical power every year. Like I said, the reservoir is designed to refill in most years. Next slide. Okay, so in 2020 year, with the runoff being projected as practically average, so we expect 255,000 acre feet of water to run off between May and July, and that amount of water is going to be more than ample to allow Green Mountain to refill and meet all of its authorized uses. If I operate this correctly and everything goes to my plan, we'll be able to use a lot of that water either for power generation or storage, and that additional water will become available for more junior diverters upstream. A really important thing that will probably occur this May or June is Green Mountain will increase its releases to the Blue River in order to augment the peak flow in the Colorado River near Grand Junction in order to provide some benefit for the endangered fish recovery. We call that the coordinated reservoir operations. And we are currently in discussion with other reservoir operators in the Upper Basin, including Denver Water and the River District, to see how we might be able to meet that augmentation goal. I do expect that the reservoir is going to fill to its maximum capacity somewhere around the first week of July. This will replace all of the allocations within it, as well as make sure that there is no water that the city's other diverters upstream that will be owed to Green Mountain. We call that a substitution, and I do not anticipate a substitution for this year. Again, my current plan has that I will always be able to generate with all releases. I won't drop below my minimum generation, about 85, and I won't exceed my maximum generation or never have to release more than my maximum turbine capacity of about 1,450 CFS. Also, as part of my authorization, I have what we call the historic user pool, or the HUP, and this is an allocation of about 1/3 of the reservoir that is designed to be delivered for the Western Colorado benefit. And often in years like this, we may be able to release some of that water to help augment flows for the Endangered Fish Recovery Program. Next slide, please. Just to walk through, I just want to point out the typical annual operation of Green Mountain. You can see where I've got it pointed out that right at this time of year, I'm actively filling the reservoir. I'm currently about 80,000 acre feet, so I'm a little over halfway full. And then from there, you can see that the blue line, or the solid line for those of us colorblind, is to the left of the median line, which means that I'm filling a little faster than typical. And in part that is due to this warm weather and rapid snowmelt, or early snowmelt, that we're currently experiencing. Next slide. Green Mountain is expected to reach the maximum fill, and the end of the fill season on around the first week of July. At that point, Green Mountain will continue to maintain that level until later, when storage deliveries are required. Next slide. Once the call comes in, or is there a need for delivery of water downstream, Green Mountain will start releasing water during the irrigation season, which normally causes a rapid decline in Green Mountain water surface elevation. Next slide. Irrigation season stops right around the 1st of November, and at that point, Green Mountain continues to make releases for beneficial use, largely for project beneficiaries, including Northern Water and the Upper Colorado River Basin water users. Next slide. Another way of looking at this is how this manifests into releases out of Green Mountain. So on this slide, you can see that the solid line is actual releases to the Blue River that I expect might occur based upon the expected hydrology. So right now you can see I'm releasing very little water, somewhere on the order of 260 CFS. And I will continue this for a while until I hit a certain storage target. At that point, I will increase the release to a point so that I can slow my fill, and so I can effectively fill my release once my peak hydrograph has passed over and my reservoir inflow has dropped below my power plant capacity. Next slide, please. Once I do fill, I will continue to follow the inflow hydrograph, decreasing flows as my inflows decrease, until later on when I'm starting to make my storage releases. Next slide. From then, starting typically in August, I'll start making rapid storage releases in order to augment flows for endangered fish or provide irrigation or replacement water. Finally, next slide. And then eventually in November, I start making releases for my winter storage releases and passing inflow. Next slide. Just looking a little more, one possible operation this year is that I may increase my release up to my power plant capacity to support the coordinated reservoir operations. Therefore, there may be up to a 10-day period where you will see flows coming out of Green Mountain on the order of about 1,450 CFS. Next slide. I do this, the way I can do this is by managing my inflows so that I don't compromise my ability to meet my authorized uses. So normally that means I will divert from my normal plan by under releasing at this time and later on so that I have enough storage to support the cross operations. Next slide. I'm going to move up to the Colorado River collection system, just give a real brief summary of what we're looking at this year. So again, a little bit more water in the upper Colorado near Lake Granby and Willow Creek Reservoir. As a result, we've got slightly better than average inflow, in part, and this is going to translate to a means for us that we're going to have to release or bypass additional water that we cannot store or divert. Our reservoirs are full and on the east slope, and we have some operational restrictions on the later on in the year that's going to limit how much water we can divert during the normal summer operations. That includes a canal that's going to be out and some work on Horsetooth Reservoir. Finally, as far as Green Mountain or Granby's operations, we will do our best to operate under Grand Lake Clarity Adaptive Management again this year. This starts in July, but it will be a little bit more constrained due to those outages that are going to be on the east slope. Next slide. Okay, and that summarizes this. And like Troy, I feel I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of those people that are contributing so much to making this pandemic work as best as it can. I have a personal experience. I ended up going into the hospital about 2.5 weeks ago with an emergency surgery. I was nervous going into the hospital. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I was nervous about coronavirus infections, but because of the sacrifice that we've all made by making sure to exercise good social distancing, wearing masks, and staying at home, that the hospital wasn't overrun by COVID cases, and that I was able to get the surgery. The surgery was successful. I was in the hospital for 8 days, and I'm on my way to full recovery. But again, I just want to thank each and every one of you for your commitment to making this pandemic work and not overwhelming our hospital system. Thank you all.
And thank you, Victor. And thanks for sharing that story at the end. I'm glad that you're on the road to recovery and everything worked out and you could make our webinar. I didn't know it was that, might be that a little scary for you. So our next speaker is going to be Nathan Elder. He's the raw water manager for Denver Water, and he's going to give us a rundown on operations at the all-important Dillon Reservoir.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, like you said, I'm Nathan Elder, manager of raw water supply for Denver Water. This is my third Summit County State of the River. And I'm going to talk about some Denver Water operations and some Dillon Reservoir operations. But before I start, I'd like to mention that we do have an email newsletter, and Alicia will be sharing the link to sign up. So if you want to stay informed of Dillon operations through email, we send that out roughly weekly and then bi-weekly when we get closer to peak runoff. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this chart, this shows our current reservoir storage. So our upper South Platte reservoirs, Antero and 11 Mile, they're currently full. Cheeseman is down roughly 30,000 acre feet. That's 64% full. That's quite a bit less than normal for this time of year. And a big reason for that is we didn't run the Roberts Tunnel over the winter. Marston Reservoir, also on the South Platte, is 58% full, again, a little bit below normal for this time of year. Strontia Springs, 91% full, right about normal. Chatfield is a little bit less than normal. And then as you can see, Dillon, we are 93% full, a bit above normal for this time of year. And then in our north system of Gross, we're well above normal for this time of year. Ralston's a bit below normal, and that's mainly due to a project we had. And then Meadow Creek is still frozen up there, and we're waiting to get readings. So overall, our system is 86% full. We are above normal for this time of year, and we do expect to fill in everything. With Dillon being so full and Cheeseman down quite a bit, we do expect to run the tunnel sometime around June and through the summer. One other thing to mention about the tunnels, we have a scheduled maintenance from the end of August through the beginning of October, so we won't have any tunnel diversions at that time. Next slide, please. So Troy talked a little bit about Colorado River snowpack, and I wanted to briefly show our South Platte collection system snowpack. So we did peak at 124% of normal on April 25th, and we're currently at 52% of that normal peak. So we've really seen a fast melting of that snowpack this year, and that was kicked off by some warmer temperatures at the end of April. So the blue line here, that shows this year, 2020's snowpack accumulation. So through most of the season, we've been above normal. The black line, that is our normal snowpack accumulation. And then the gray outline is our historic range. So as you can see with the blue line, we're melting a bit quicker than usual and a bit earlier than normal. So next slide. All right, moving back to the west slope and to Dillon Reservoir. This chart shows the current CBRFC, or Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, inflow projections. So the April through July projection for Dillon Reservoir is 170,000 acre feet, and that's 104% of average. So we're expecting a pretty close to average year as far as inflow goes. Compare that to last year, and we had 240,000 acre feet in that same time period, so the April through July inflow. So in this chart, it also shows the range. So if you're looking above the May 2020 and you see the pink line with the different dots on it, that shows the range of the forecast, and it ranges this year from 140,000 acre feet to 205,000 acre feet. But again, that most probable or 50% scenario is for 170,000 acre feet. And we can move on to our next slide. So this chart breaks down that April through July inflow into daily numbers. So on the left side of the chart in black line, that is the actual observed inflow to the reservoir that we've seen so far. So again, at the end of April, we saw it a really good increase with some warm temperatures. And then lately, the past 10 days or so, it's held pretty steady around that 500 CFS mark. On the right side in turquoise, that's the range of the daily forecast. And then the gray line is the average of that daily inflow forecast range. So you can see from the gray line, on average, inflow peaks at 1500 CFS. This is a little bit below the typical average that we see if we're looking at historical data. Around 1900 CFS is typically the average peak inflow to the reservoir. But you can see from this range, with wet future weather conditions, we do get up to 2500 CFS for that peak inflow. We can move on to next slide. All right, so looking at the short-term forecast, again, on the left in blue, this is observed inflow to the reservoir. The green outlook is with pretty good weather forecasts, and then the purple is increasing uncertainty within the weather forecast. But with that, we're expecting some warmer temperatures Sunday and Monday, and to start to see higher amounts of inflow with the warmer temperatures and increased snow melt. Currently, that forecast is up to roughly 1500 on May 21st. And then, so with those forecasted inflows, we are expecting to increase our outflow at some point next week based on what we actually see, if it matches the forecast or if the weather conditions change between now and then. Next slide, please. So the overall summary of our operations, Dillon is expected to fill and spill this year. Our peak outflow will likely be between 800 and 1600 CFS. And that's really going to be highly dependent on future precipitation. It will be towards the higher end if we get some above average precipitation, and outflows above 500 CFS are expected to last 2 to 6 weeks. June 1st, we expect the reservoir to be at elevation 9012, so all the marinas should be good to go if they're allowed to operate. And again, the caveat there being that unless we see significant May, June precipitation, we may have to lower that elevation to capture the peak runoff. And next slide. So again, thank you all for having me, and I want to encourage you, if you're interested in Dillon outflows, to go to our website and sign up for the email newsletter. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Don't go away. We had 2 questions roll in for you, but we'll tackle them at the end. Our next speaker is Kalsoum Abbasi. She's an engineer with Colorado Springs Utilities, and she's going to tell us about the Blue Lake system on Hoosier Pass. So take it away, Kalsum.
Thanks, Jim, and good evening, everyone. By way of mic check, I will just introduce our collection system really briefly to you. I don't have a map of it, but if you can't hear me, someone pipe up. As Jim mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, our collection system is pretty much nestled right under Hoosier Pass. So we own Upper Blue Reservoir, and we collect water there, and then in Monte Cristo Creek below that. We have collection systems on Spruce Creek, McCullough Creek, and Crystal Creek. And then on the east side of Highway 9, we also collect water on Bemrose Creek. And we bring all of that through Hoosier Tunnel under the Continental Divide to Montgomery Reservoir on the Middle Fork of the South Platte. So just on the south side of the pass, which we also own. So go ahead and advance to the first slide, please. Thanks. So I'll show you one more SNOTEL site graph. Because our collection system is pretty small and it's focused right at Hoosier Pass, we use the Hoosier Pass SNOTEL site, as you might imagine, to do our forecasting. So this is the most recent graph I found, and it was current as of yesterday. Hoosier Pass still had about 121% of median snowpack up on the mountains. So you can see runoff has started. That dark black line is a snow water equivalent for this year. And there are some projected runoff patterns. The kind of pale purple one is a pretty optimistic, I think, expecting a little, or projecting maybe a little bit of increased snowpack up there. But if you notice, it's really hard to see the paler blue lines, but everything from the 10% projection to the 50% projection is all pretty well clustered together, and it's showing a pretty fast runoff. So that's really what we're expecting to see. I think it's the most realistic option. So we do have all of our collection system turned in, and I will say flows are not very high yet. We're bringing about 10 CFS total through the tunnel, through Hoosier Tunnel right now. And typically once runoff gets going, we'll see that up to 150, maybe even 200 plus CFS in a big year. Next slide, please. For our forecasting, we also look at some NRCS stream flow forecasts. We'll look at Dillon Reservoir inflow, Green Mountain Reservoir inflow, and the Colorado River near Dot Zero. And those are kind of the best analogs that we have for our system to help us predict what we think runoff is going to look like. And then the Dot Zero gauge is the gauge that often calls us out. We look at that as well. So these were the May 1st numbers. Everything was running at or slightly above average of projected stream flow. In addition to these, we do also look at the CBRFC forecasts, and Nathan showed us a graph of the Dillon, the most recent Dillon forecast. And that one is still tracking pretty closely to the May 1st NRCS forecast. I did note that the CBRFC inflow forecasts for Green Mountain Reservoir and Dot Zero were a little bit lower than what I'm showing on the slide, so more like 95% maybe at Dot Zero and 100% of average at Green Mountain Reservoir. So still, considering what much of the state is looking like, the main stem of the Colorado and certainly Summit County are still faring very well as far as snowpack and expected runoff. So our most recent forecast was this May 1st forecast, and we predict that we might collect 13,600 acre feet off of the Blue River system this year. Next slide, please. We do have room for pretty much all of that 13,600 acre feet that we're projecting. Terminal storage in our citywide system is about average for this time of year. And we've seen slightly above average May demands in town. As you can probably guess, May irrigation demands can really vary quite a bit from year to year. So this year for May, things are looking fairly average. As I mentioned, we do also operate Montgomery Reservoir on the south side of the pass, and there is quite a bit of snow above that. So we are managing flows on both sides of Hoosier Pass in both sides of our collection system. So if we start to see a lot of runoff coming off of the the South Platte side, and Montgomery Reservoir starts filling too fast and we're blowing off water down below that reservoir, we'll usually turn out our Blue River collections because we just can't handle so much water. We can't have that reservoir coming up too quickly. So whether or not we're able to collect everything we project is available to us this year depends a lot on how quickly runoff comes off. And if it stays warm, it may start to come off pretty quick. But so far, we have not seen that. And as I mentioned, anything that we turn out because we can't fit it into Montgomery Reservoir just goes down to Blue River into Montgomery Reservoir. I think that's my last slide, but you can advance one more and see. Yep, that's all I have for you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsum. So I think what we've learned from all our presenters so far is that snowpack in Summit County and Grand County is doing quite well, and runoff is 100% or better. That's not true in the whole basin. For instance, down on the Grand Mesa, they're only looking at 40% of runoff because snowpack barely got above 60% on the Grand Mesa. So that's important for Grand Junction, for municipal water supply, and and irrigation. And how that all gets magnified across the whole Colorado River Basin is the forecast of runoff for April through July into Lake Powell is only 65%. So that's going to present its own set of immediate and long-term problems as well. So yeah, we still want to pay attention to Lake Powell, and as much as the River District is concerned with water security inside of Colorado, there's also the bigger questions of water security against the use of the Colorado River in our other six basin states in the Republic of Mexico. So we're going to go to our next speakers before we go to questions, and Erica Donahue and Peggy Bailey are going to give us an update on the planning that's occurring in the Blue River watershed to address some degradation issues.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Donahue. I'm the Executive Director of the Blue River Watershed Group. And if we can move to the next slide, I just want to start with a quick introduction to who the Blue River Watershed Group is. So our mission is to promote, protect, and restore a healthy Blue River watershed through cooperative community education, stewardship, and resource management. So what that means in practice is that we have three main areas of programming. We work in watershed planning, we work in stream restoration, and in education. So as just one example of our work over the past few years, we've been involved in the Swan River restoration project near Breckenridge, partnering with Summit County and several other groups on that project. So as you can see from those pretty dramatic before and afters, the valley was very heavily affected by dredge mining historically, and in some places the river didn't even come above the surface of the ground. So if you see the after photo as a very healthy river corridor. Next slide, please. So our current project, and this is the majority of our focus right now, is the Blue River Integrated Water Management Plan that we are working on with our partner Trout Unlimited. And so the purpose of this plan is to take a look at all of the consumptive and non-consumptive uses in the watershed to evaluate all current and future needs. And then we want to integrate all of those needs and uses for the maximum benefit of the health and sustainability of the watershed. And through all that, making sure that we are respecting and protecting existing water rights. So the first part of this IWMP plan is going to happen in two separate tasks. So the first part that we're currently working through is to compile, review, and integrate existing studies, data, and any other information we can get our hands on into give us a really clear picture of the current condition of our watershed so that we have a really solid starting point to move forward making recommendations for what projects can improve the health of our watershed. And the second task that we're looking at is to understand the potential causes of the declining fishery between Dillon and Green Mountain Reservoir and determine whether or not and how we can address that decline and potentially restore that fishery. Next slide, please. Just wanted to give a quick recognition to many of our sponsors for the IWMP. The majority of the project is funded through a grant from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Next slide, please. So one part of the IWMP that we've been working really hard on lately is a community outreach process. So we developed a really short, really simple survey to get out into the community at places like Copper Mountain, other partner events, anywhere that we really could get in front of people, obviously before the coronavirus happened. So we were able to collect about 130 responses to this simple survey, where we listed the several issues you see on this slide as problems that are affecting our watershed and asked people to rank their top 3 priorities and concerns. So as you can see from this graph, the top 3 concerns really came out as climate change, water quality impacts from historic mining and abandoned mines, and then also the increasing land development and population growth in Summit County. So those are things that we will be taking into consideration as we go through the IWMP process, and we'll be continuing to participate in this outreach. And we also do have a more in-depth survey that we would love to have your input on. So as a more, I would say this group is a well-informed part of our community, and your input would be really valuable. So Alicia will put that link to that survey in the chat box if you have a few minutes to take that. So now I'm going to hand this off to Peggy Bailey, one of our board members, to talk a little bit more about the details of our progress on the plan.
Thank you, Erica. So I'm going to first start off and talk about the watershed, give you an overview of the watershed, just to provide some context when we start talking about the IWMP. The watershed closely aligns with Summit County, and in fact is almost exactly the same. There's about 699 square miles of watershed, of which 680 square miles is within Summit County. The remaining 20 acres or so is in Grand County, and that's basically the last stretch of the Blue River before it flows into the Colorado. There is about 80% of the land is publicly owned, so Forest Service and BLM. We have about 7,000 feet of elevation drop from the headwaters down to the confluence. The river is about 65 miles long, and there's really just 2 major impoundments, plus goose pasture tarn, which is quite small, but compared to the other, but Green Mountain and Dillon are the primary impoundments. So next slide. Within the Blue River watershed, there are 5 major communities and towns, 4 major ski areas. There's 38 farms occupying 25,000 acres, or thereabouts. In 2016, our population was estimated to be about 30,000, and in 2050, that's projected to be about 51,000. The tourist industry has a big impact on Summit County, and something I found interesting was that in 2007 and 8, we had 4 million skier visits in that ski season. We also have a fairly strong summer tourist industry. So just a little background. Okay, next slide. In 2012, a study was developed which estimated that the watershed of Blue River generates about 310,000 acre feet of water per year. There are a lot of demands on this volume of water, on this resource, and that includes 5 transbasin diverters, removing about 95,000 acre feet of water per year. This is a 10-year average calculated in 2012. The diversions are projected to increase. There's also municipal water use, which in 2000 was estimated to be about 8,000 acre feet and projected to be 18,000 acre feet at full build out. Municipal water use is the town's snowmaking local uses here in Summit County. Agriculture industry flood irrigates about 9,000 acre feet. And of course, last but not least, the recreational uses that depend on this water resource include boating, angling, the ski industry, and just the aesthetics. Next slide. So for the purpose of the Integrated Water Management Plan and report, we divided the watershed into 3 reaches, 1, 2, and 3, upper, middle, and lower. These might get subdivided as we get further along, most likely will. But for our initial effort at gathering existing information and data and reviewing it, we divided it into these 3 reaches. And we were trying to look at 4 subjects: hydrology and water use, water quality and temperature, aquatic life, and stream assessments, particularly with in terms of aquatic habitat. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about each reach and just touch on some of the highlights of each reach. There's a lot of information, but some of the more interesting facts that, want to go to the next slide, please? Just some of the more interesting aspects of what we've found so far. So Reach 1, which is the headwaters region down to the outlet of Dillon Reservoir, includes 4 tributaries. One thing that we are seeing is that there are periods of low flow that occur in the late fall. This tends to be a natural occurrence, given that there are no major impoundments that are used to augment flow in the late fall. So it will tend to drop off. But sometimes that, coupled with snowmaking and not so frequently, but could occur diversions at the headwaters, can dewater the reach a fair amount in the late season. Future flow conditions could actually make this potentially lower. The other interesting aspect about this, which is probably no surprise to the people who live here, is that there are water quality issues which are related to the mining impacts, and you can see that in and near the areas of the Blue River where they confluence with French Gulch and Illinois Gulch. So these hard rock mining impacts tend to be, excuse me, presence of cadmium and zinc. Next slide. Also within Reach 1, yeah, thank you. The aquatic life, CPW reports that the lower portion of Reach 1, close to Dillon Reservoir, is actually an excellent fishery, but it does appear to be in a bit of decline, and we don't know why. And then as you get closer to Breckenridge, the fishery is not as robust due to water quality issues and fragmentation. There are not a lot of stream habitat assessments, but this particular stretch of the river, especially from between Breckenridge and Dillon, has been highly impacted by dredge boat mining. And this really has been, at least in the past, not much of a river left. And dredge boat mining also impacted the floodplain. So it's a very wide expanse, and the river itself has actually just been turned upside down. There's a lot of ongoing restoration right now, so there's a lot of studies and assessments in these Blue River and Swan in particular, as you saw in our earlier slides. Next slide. Reach 2 is between the outlet of Dillon Reservoir down to the outlet of Green Mountain Reservoir. The flows in this reach are affected by transbasin diversions. In particular, the 2 major diverters, CSU and Denver Water, divert up above this section. And almost all the municipal water users, except portions of Dillon and Silverthorne, divert from here as well. The releases are highly regulated and can be very cold. And the reason being is that Dillon Reservoir releases water out of the bottom of the reservoir until flows get high, in which case then they start to spill through the glory hole, and the surface water is quite warm then. And when it does get released over this through the glory hole, then those surface waters will warm the temperatures. Next slide. So I'm just going to show you a very busy plot here that demonstrates this. This is one graph that the Forest Service provided. It is taken in 2008. The blue line are flow releases from Dillon Reservoir during spring runoff. It looks like, yep, thank you. It peaked and started to spill in late June, early July, and then dropped it. When the flows are being released out of the bottom of the reservoir, they tend to run very flatlined, right where the cursor is there at about 100 or 150 CFS in this particular example. But when the spillway does flow, then they peak. Now the 3 colored lines you see in there are temperature gauges downstream of the reservoir. The red is a temperature gauge that's very close to the reservoir outlet, and you can see it's the coldest of the 3. Then the green is green squiggly line is a temperature gauge down by the Blue River campground. So they do tend to warm up as you go downstream, but you can see the abrupt temperature change that occurs with spills out of Dillon Reservoir. And next slide. We anticipate that the future flows could potentially actually lower flows in the Blue River below the reservoir due to increased demands and additional diversions, transbasin diversions. Water quality tends to be very good in this stretch, or at least that's what we're finding so far. The water quality work is still ongoing. The aquatic life, there is a stretch of this river that does not meet gold medal status, and actually appears that the fishery is in decline. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we discuss our task 2 objective. There are no detailed stream assessments of aquatic habitat. And again, just to backtrack a little bit, I'm talking about assessments of pools and riffles, geomorphic assessment, how wide is the river? Is it too wide or too shallow? But we do know that there's a fairly robust riparian corridor through this reach. Next slide. Reach 3 is downstream of Green Mountain Reservoir. And a lot of this reach lies in Grand County. And in 2010, Grand County did a stream management plan, which is sort of the predecessor to the IWMPs. This reach was studied in detail, including environmental flow assessment for the benefit of aquatic habitat, in particular for fish. And then there were some recommended flows that were provided. And what we're seeing is that these recommended flows are commonly present in this reach of the river. Below Green Mountain Reservoir, the Blue River is really the benefactor of the releases that come out of Green Mountain. The only unusual thing about hydrology is that we have those late season fall releases that Victor discussed. And if you go to the next slide, I could show you. So there's 4 gauges on here. The blue, and this is average monthly flows between 2005 and 2019. The blue, gray, and orange lines on here represent average monthly flows at 3 gauges that are below Dillon Reservoir, above Dillon Reservoir, and in Blue River. And you can see that they tend to rise and fall as you would expect, with peaks in June or thereabouts, May, June, and July, and then fall off in the fall. Whereas in the Green Mountain Reservoir, you can see those higher peaks in the late season. Okay, next slide. Other aspects of Reach 3, the water quality appears to be relatively good. The aquatic life is excellent. There are abundant quality brown trout in this reach. There's been a lot of restoration in this reach too, and that fisheries have been the benefactors of that as well. The Grand County Stream Management Plan did do a number of site assessments and also concluded that's robust aquatic riparian corridor. Aquatic habitat is abundant, adult habitat upstream and juvenile habitat, spawning habitat towards the downstream reaches. Next slide. The other task that we're doing at this stage in our phase 1 stage of work is to look at the declining fishery in the Reach 2. And we're working with BREW, which is the best acronym ever, right? Blue River Enhancement Work Group. They formed in 2016 as a result of the gold medal status delisting for portions of the Blue River. And they began studying and trying to assess what is impacting this fishery. So we are working with them now and trying to bring some resources to this, and we're reviewing again all data that's available, and also starting to implement some additional site investigations. And what we have going on right now are additional macroinvertebrate sampling, which we're performing this summer. We've done 1 set of samples already in April, and we've got one coming up after peak runoff, and then again in the fall to help inform on the health of the bugs, and then temperature monitoring. So that's kind of the fast and fury of it. I'm going to turn it back over to Erica.
Awesome. And Alicia, thanks. So I just wanted to talk really briefly kind of about what we're doing now and going forward. A lot of the next few steps we're doing are working with the advisory committee to share all of this data and research that Peggy's been describing so that we can get input back from the advisory committee, which will really inform and finalize the goals and objectives that go into the plan. So hopefully we'll be able to hold some advisory committee meetings in person later this year, but if not, we will be figuring out a way to hold those virtually. We also had some community meetings planned for the year, but obviously those are a little bit in limbo as we go through and figure out how things are going to proceed with coronavirus. But do keep an eye out for when we have some of those community meetings to get input from our community. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I have just a few ways you could get involved if you're interested in seeing more in depth what's coming of this plan. So we have room on our advisory committee for folks to join if you want to be able to have a really direct voice in the direction that the IWMP goes. Also keep an eye out for those community meetings and more information on that. And you can sign up for our newsletter on our website to keep in touch. And do please fill out our survey. I've actually already seen a response or two come in during the event. So again, Eleanor dropped that link in the chat box. So please do check that out. We really do appreciate your input and it's very important to this process for us. A few other ways to support our organization. We just launched a membership program. So if you're interested in supporting our work on a more ongoing basis, you can also click the second link that Eleanor put in the chat box to see a little bit more about membership and what that benefits are. We are also holding our first river cleanup this August in conjunction with Make a Difference Day. So if you want to get out and help clean up the watershed, keep an eye out for more info on that. And we do have room on our board of directors if anyone is really interested. And on that note, the last slide just has my contact information and also Richard Van Geitenbeck's contact information, who is our partner at Trout Unlimited, if you have any further questions or want to know some more about the process. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peggy and Erica. That's an interesting study, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out on the back end of it. So if we could get Nathan back up. We have a couple questions directed at Denver Water. And the first one, Nathan, is could you revisit the dates on when the Roberts Tunnel is under construction and when there's not going to be diversions out of Dillon?
Yes, right now it's planned for the last week in August through the first week in October.
Last week in August to the first week in October.
Yep.
Okay. And by the way, that question came from a Summit County native who's in Montana, but I guess he's going to come home this summer. So that shows the reach of what a virtual webinar can do. And here's another question from a water geek I know in Glenwood Springs. He is interested in hearing what Denver Water's doing above Dillon Reservoir to ensure forest health and thereby water supply health.
So we have our Forest to Faucets program. We are in Forest to Faucets 2, and that was signed in 2017. So I don't know specifically what we're doing in 2020, but that program does tree thinning and some other places it might be clear cutting, planting new trees, just working with the Forest Service on a partnership to improve forest health, to mainly prevent large wildfires.
Thank you. And then we had a general question talking about how outdoor irrigation of lawns is 50% consumptive and how we feel about that. And I know from doing these summit states of the rivers in years past that comes up, and it's usually directed, at the Front Range, and certainly the water that we apply to lawns is 50% consumptive, give or take. But that's also true in Summit County and the West Slope, when outdoor irrigation takes place, it is 50% consumptive. So that's why I don't want to speak for Denver Water, but I know Denver Water is keenly pushing native landscaping, and that's a burgeoning issue in Western Colorado and the whole Colorado River Basin as well. And I don't know if Andy Mueller is still around, but Andy, if you want to address the general nexus between development, outdoor landscaping, and water supply, and how the River District's thinking about that.
I would, Jim, and I just want to say, I think the question about the lawn was actually someone's postulated that 50% of the water that's diverted in transbasin diversions is actually consumed by lawns, is the way I read that question. And I honestly have never seen that number. It may be true in Denver's system, and Nathan, I don't know if you are aware of that. I think in northern Colorado, more of it is consumed in agriculture than it is in urban, whether indoor or outdoor use. But Nathan, do you have any idea on the Denver system?
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers there.
Okay. I would say that, one of the things that we're pushing very hard at the River District and working with many of our partners is really pushing the nexus between water planning and land use planning. And we think it's absolutely critical for decades. The water community and the land use community operated in parallel universes within Colorado in many respects. And we believe that while land use planning needs to be done on a local basis determined by the local population, we believe that all local populations have an obligation to institute water conservation measures that are appropriate in terms of outdoor use for the environment in which they're located. And so most of our service area, or most of our district, is in a high country desert, high plains desert. We think that the idea of curb to foundation bluegrass is something that not only shouldn't we be doing that within our own district, but we don't want to see that happen with transbasin water on the Front Range either. And I think that as Coloradans who value the flows in our river and the wildlife and the habitat that depend on it, we all need to chip in and pay attention and reduce our water consumptive use outdoors. So we have encouraged our West Slope counties and municipalities to engage in that kind of land use planning. I would applaud the Northwest COG, Northwest Council of Governments, in which Summit County and many of the municipalities within Summit County are members. They've done some really great work with the Lincoln Institute and the Sonoran Institute, trying to encourage new code development in their communities to really help with water conservation. So I think those are the types of efforts that we very much support and hope that others adopt. So.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for catching the nuance of the question that we got twice.
Not that we gave an answer, but at least we.
Yeah, right. But it still gets to the point about how best can we use the water that we have. Well, I don't see any more questions, and I guess I would, here's one for Andy. Can you talk briefly about how the long-term benefits of the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement for the West Slope communities? So it's about the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, and what are the long-term benefits for West Slope communities?
Sure, and for those who aren't as familiar with what the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement is, it's an agreement between Denver Water and about 20 West Slope entities, including the River District. It was the negotiation, it was a product of a negotiation that lasted multiple years about the expansion of Denver's Moffett Tunnel collection system and the potential expansion of Gross Reservoir over in Boulder County. And as is our charge at the River District, we wanted to see if any kind of additional diversions were going to occur. We wanted the basin of origin in Summit County and Grand County to be compensated. We wanted river flows and forest health to be protected and funded. We negotiated a number of different West Slope and Summit County in particular funds that are designed to assist in healthy rivers and stream flow issues. There were additional releases of water secured out of Dillon at certain times in the Blue River operations, which were beneficial the way the timing of the system worked to help the river. The Shoshone Power Plant, which, as many people know, draws water westward through both Summit and Grand counties and then all the way down, actually has the effect of bringing water all the way down to the border in Utah. That's a very important senior right on the river, and when it's operating at certain times, it will call out these transbasin diversions and limit their ability to bring water over to the Front Range. It will help protect it does help protect our stream flows. So that's part of that Colorado River Cooperative Agreement as well. There are a lot of different aspects of it. I would say that it's working well. A number of the monetary benefits we're still waiting on because they were contingent upon final permit approval of the Gross Reservoir expansion. Permits are being held up right now by Boulder County, where that reservoir is located under their permitting authority, and there is litigation ongoing about the federal permitting. And so some of the benefits that the West Slope communities negotiated have yet to be seen. We're still hopeful that those benefits will come to fruition. That whole negotiation process, interestingly enough, was kind of an attempt at a new way of doing business. The Denver Water and the River District we have a long history of litigation and fighting over their diversions, and particularly over the Blue River diversion system, dating far back into the 50s and even before, trying to figure out a way that we could actually control the outcome of our conflicts and create collaborative solutions that work is really what that Colorado River Cooperative Agreement did. And I think that it set a model for much of what the state and in fact the Colorado River Basin whole is currently pursuing in terms of how we all get along and share the resource that we all value and need. So, Jim, you're muted still.
Yeah, I had to do a quick mute because my dog was barking. So I don't see any more questions. If any of the speakers want to say something that they wish they had said, this could be an opportunity. Otherwise, we want to thank everybody for joining us. I was scrolling through the attendees list, and we had people locally and from far and wide. So these things are very interesting, these virtual meetings. Anyway, somebody said, very nice presentations. Thank you so much to that person, and to all our speakers and all our attendees. And hopefully next year, about this time, we'll be back in Silverthorne for a live meeting with food and cookies. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.